What's going on? This is the Saturday Down South podcast. I am Connor O'Gara. Will, have you already tried to clear your schedule for July 19th?
July 19th. So this is, let's see, let me look at my wall back here. Okay, July 19th looks like
Well, you're not talking in the mic when you do that.
Okay, I got you. What's on July 19th, man?
July 19th is a certain video game that's coming out. You might have heard.
Oh my gosh, I was thinking about this very thing earlier because I'm going to WNBA All-Star. That's why that date is on my wall. So I'm going to have to just I guess, bring my Xbox, go find a buddy out there. Yeah, that's going to be electric.
Yeah, do you want to check your Xbox on a flight? Is that frowned upon? I think you can do that. Plenty of people have done way crazier things. If you can check a TV at, like you can check an Xbox, that at least fits into a carry-on. I think you're going to be good there as long as you're not hauling too much stuff out to WNBA All-Star Weekend.
Yeah, I think hopefully they'll have, some booth set up or something, but it's going to be a big day in my life for sure. And, if I can't get to play it, just know I'd rather listen to this. You got a couple days head start. Better get in the lab. All right, you better learn those playbooks because I'm going to figure them out. I'm going to get you.
Pick your team right now. We have a college football video game and a day to be able to count down to it 2 months away. We have a great show coming up, Will. Brad Crawford is going to join us in a little bit. We talk some Dabo because don't you know it, Dabo went full Dabo yet again. We can talk about that. Some SEC quarterback rankings, just because it's very prevalent today. Little EA Sports college football video game at the end. And then we're going to close with some SEC scheduling thoughts with ESPN releasing some of these week one kickoff times. And I think some different perspectives that we can take away from that. But first, let's talk about the guy who somehow did not earn a spot on one of the covers for this new video game. A guy that, might be the most electric player in all of college football, but Luther Burden III. This is a Luther Burden III pod today. Mizzou fans, if you're frustrated, you have come to the right place. We're talking all about your boy because I think, that Luther Burden III is the best returning player in the SEC. We'll start there.
Okay, I can hear that argument for sure, yeah.
It is an argument worth having, and maybe not so much that we're going to dig into today with the ins and outs of specific players, because I'm telling you right now that when I do...
How about this? Instead of best, maybe most impactful, right? Because it's hard to judge like an offensive lineman like Will Campbell or even like a DT in some cases, right? But I think that a guy that can change games, I'm there.
Fair. Yeah, Graham Nicholson might have the argument for best at his position of any returning player now that he's at Alabama. But if we're talking about most impactful, I'm going to go with Luther Burden III. I'm going to go with the Mizzou receiver who, he has a lot of competition in this discussion. When I do these rankings, these are the guys that will be at the top. I'm just letting you know right now. Will Campbell, a guy that I've already gone on record saying, if I'm picking one person to be a first-round pick from the SEC next year, that's my guy. Malachi Starks, of course, he's going to be on every preseason All-America team. James Pierce Jr., the Tennessee edge rusher, maybe even a Carson Beck, a Quinn Ewers. They could be part of that conversation. And if used properly, I think we can all agree that Harold Perkins has the potential to be the best defensive player in all of college football. Right. All fair points, probably some other names that you could throw into that conversation as well. But why we're talking about Luther Burden III as the best returning player in the SEC is for a reason that, I think we all have, whether we admit it or not. When I look at these preseason All-American teams that come out at any point, really in the offseason, there's no sort of timely element to it. You can come out with it in January, you can come out with it in July, whatever. But when I look at any one of these lists, if I don't see Luther Burden III, he is the guy that I am most outraged not to see. Okay.
Yep.
All those other guys, you're like, all right, maybe you could find a little bit of a replacement for. Or you could say, oh, that guy's just as good as him at the position. Maybe Malachi Starks is the one that you kind of look at and you're like, all right, no, you're getting a little bit too cute if you don't have him as one of those safeties, or maybe you got cute at the DB spot and you just did all corners and you forgot about safeties. But Luther Burden III, he's on all these teams. He should be. And he's there and he's in this conversation because of what we've seen him do in these last 2 years. It is remarkable. Before we get into who he's been so far in the SEC, is that a fair point to be able to make about someone that we've obviously talked about a lot on this podcast before?
Yeah, he's the rare guy that is has lived up to the potential.
Yes.
Right? I mean, and I'll say it like this. We saw him as a recruit and we thought, okay, he's got to obviously hold up his end of the bargain and continue to be this talented and stay in the weight room and stand out the way he did in high school, not to be like a bust right to your level. Then it was, okay, now can we get some type of an OC or play caller in here to actually put him? Because from his freshman season, we knew what he was, right? But then it took another step up because he got a little bit older, a little bit bigger, got in a new system that maximized him. So this is kind of the most exciting type of player, right? Which is not exactly like a Devontae Smith where it's like, oh, wow, we just rated you wrong in high school. You are nasty. You're going to be like one of the greatest ever. It's a guy that we had high expectations coming in. He decided to do the right thing, stay home, like we talked about, didn't hit the portal, didn't go to Georgia, didn't do all that. And he's going to finish his college career, assuming he stays healthy and everything stays fine, at his hometown team, which is really, really hard to do to kind of put everyone in your back in the modern era.
Very difficult. It's the thing that I think is most impressive about LeBron.
Yep, exactly who I was thinking of. Yep.
If you're going to do that with all the hype, all the buildup, knowing what everybody's saying about you, and then you go out and you somehow exceed expectations, which I would argue that Luther Burden has already done, to me, that makes you a different kind of cat. And one that we should celebrate and we should talk about on a random Thursday in May. So I have no problem doing that. Well, let's go back to what he did as a true freshman, or rather what he was asked to do as a true freshman. Remember the stat about true freshman SEC receivers that we were talking about with Cam Coleman. In the last 8 seasons, Jalen Waddle was the only true freshman SEC wide receiver who hit 800 receiving yards in a season. Luther Burden did not hit 800 receiving yards, but they really relied on him to play a ton on the outside. Why did they do that? Because their best receiver was Dom Lovett. He was the go-to guy. He operated primarily out of the slot. Mizzou was trying to figure out that freshman year the best way to be able to use him. And here's all you need to know about that. In Luther Burden's college debut in 2022, he played 44 snaps out wide, only 5 slot snaps, which was obviously very different than his role last year, which we'll get to later. And he played 3 as a Wildcat quarterback, and he lined up once in line. That is a ton to ask of someone in their first game of college football, even as decorated as Luther Burden was, to say, you're going to do all these different things. We expect you to do all these different things in the playbook, how to be able to read blocks from this way. And this is how we feel you should be used, or at least we're going to figure these things out on the fly. And
to say really quick, too, to kind of go back to the point of the expectations, like we've seen this guy who isn't used properly, and that's like Evan Stewart, right? Because that reminds me of how they used him his first year at A&M, where it was like, you're getting a slot, like you're getting a fade in the goal line, and that's the amount of trust that they had in Luther Burden, because both players were pretty much the most, a little bit different with Evan Stewart, right? But Luther Burden became the most trusted receiver by the end of the year. And I would say this is maybe a little bit controversial. If Dom Lovett was on that team, I think he'd be the 3rd best receiver there.
If he's on Mizzou,
this upcoming team.
I'll still take Dom Lovett over Theo Weiss. I know you love Theo Weiss. I know you love Theo Weiss.
That's all I'm saying. So it's like, it's tough to have to like still be utilized that way, but be a number 2. It's just like he was put in a very difficult situation, you know?
And by the way, it took me a second to figure out what you're talking about with Evan Stewart, because I'm thinking back to his freshman year usage, and I'm like, you know what? That guy was actually lined up out wide a decent amount for someone his size. But you're talking about the Bama game.
I'm talking about that's the problem. I'm talking about they were not putting him in these positions to succeed. They were just kind of making him do everything.
Sure, yeah. And throwing a fade to that guy in that spot on such a low percentage throw with game on the line was just still a baffling decision that I did not agree with. But with Burden, part of why he was used that way because of how decorated he was. You have to find ways to make sure that guy is on the field. Mizzou's relationship with Luther Burden, whether Mizzou fans want to hear this or not, it was the movie She's Out of My League. It was. Great movie. Kind of an underrated rom-com, in my opinion. Very rewatchable. Go back and rewatch. I think it's on Netflix. And I'm well aware that Mizzou has had great receivers. I'm not saying that Luther Burden III was the first great receiver to ever come through. I'm old enough to remember Dorial Green Beckham. That was a fun guy to be able to watch. Super, super decorated. I'd argue Luther Burden III already had a better career than him. Yep. But you get what I'm saying. This isn't exactly a 5-star factory. He was the first 5-star on the roster since Terry Beckner 2018. Okay? So that's what we're talking about here. Visiting Georgia and then turning around and committing to Mizzou, the in-state school. That was the biggest recruiting win of the Eli Drinkowitz era, and I'm not even sure it's that close. I know the Rakestraw video, that gets a lot of love because of Drink's reaction to it and beating out Bama for that guy, a guy who ends up being an NFL player, NFL draft pick, last month. But still, the victory to get Burden was one that, look, it's the type of recruiting win that if you're a school like Mizzou, you just dream of. So you have no choice whatsoever to get that guy on the field, whether he's ready for it or not, because everyone in the room realizes the obvious. A guy like Burden, even an in-state kid that can say all these things about loyalty and wanting to stay home, wanting to do it right, build the program up, all those different things. You know that if he's not playing that freshman year at Mizzou, that temptation is going to linger. That is just going to happen. In this era of the transfer portal where guys can leave without penalty and tampering isn't controlled or enforced at all, if Mizzou messes up that freshman year, that could have been a very prominent part of the drink eulogy at Mizzou. And yes, I mean eulogy at Mizzou. Yep. For a little bit, I kind of wondered if that's how things were going to play out. I really did, because while Burden was getting on the field a ton that first year, the touches were not there, at least in the way that many felt that they should be. I defended some of it because I remember at the time saying how difficult it is to get someone touches that's a true freshman. He's playing, this position on the outside where he doesn't have that size advantage. You can't just throw it up to him. And especially when there were a couple of early instances where targeting that guy even within 5 yards of the line of scrimmage was not a smart move. And it led to picks in a couple of early season games, including the very well documented early season game against Auburn, where it looked like things were maybe starting to splinter between Burden and Mizzou. Let's go back to that game. That's the one where Mizzou wins at Jordan-Hare, if not for the fumble on the goal line, the Meebus chip shot. Mizzou fans, this is a positive space. I don't mean to take you back to a dark place, but it's worth remembering. RG3 was on that broadcast, and the back and forth that he had with Mark Jones that day, late in the third quarter, was Mizzou's worst nightmare. Like the type of thing where if you had told a Mizzou fan the day that Luther Burden III committed that, hey, this is going to be the conversation, a month into his freshman season, you're like, oh my God, this is really, really bad. This is not going to end well. RG3 says, have we called Luther Burden III's name yet? And Mark Jones said, they still haven't targeted him that much. And some behind the scenes person, with production, one of those stats people, definitely handed RG3 a note, and he reads it going, he's got 2 targets, no catches. I mean, what's going on? If you're Eli Drinkwitz, you've got to get this guy the ball. RG3 then talked about the Wildcat package, how weird it was that they weren't being able to get this into this game against Auburn, where they were so desperate for any offensive life. They couldn't score a touchdown in the second half of this game. They couldn't score even when they were on the goal line, about to waltz in for a touchdown. They couldn't get a chip shot field goal from the guy that is considered maybe the best kicker in program history. They literally could not do anything to get points on the board, and they weren't willing to go that route. And
wait, am I remembering this correctly? Because I feel like watching that game, they were like building graphics throughout the game to like add to Luther Burden. Like I remember there was almost like a solo cam on him because RG3 just kept talking about him. And it was like, oh, Luther Burden, 5-star recruit, like chyrons were coming up. He was so locked into Luther Burden.
He was really locked into him. He was. And it was bad. And I remember we had RG3 on the show right after, like a few days after that game. And we talked more about this feeling out process with Luther Burden. And what they kind of forgot in that game was that earlier there was a target for him that was picked off. It was where, he's lined up on the outside. He runs a quick slant against Nehemiah Pritchett. It's a ball that Pritchett's the veteran corner. He tips this pass, goes right into the arms of Derek Hall. And you're like, that's a pretty unfortunate play. And that's why you can't automatically force feed these guys targets all the time in the way that we think we can. It's different, obviously, if you're doing a pop pass, you're doing Wildcat stuff. But why it's not as simple as, hey, just target him no matter what. He hasn't gotten to that place in his career yet. But at that time, it was still such a touchy subject because Burden stripped all of his mentions of Mizzou on IG and then posted that very cryptic story wherein he said, patiently waiting. We've talked about this before. I hate it when dudes at any level do that. And then they pretend like we in the media or as fans are blowing things out of proportion when we start speculating. What did you think was going to happen? What was the point of that? If that was just done randomly, do that randomly in April or do that in February when you're not playing football, or provide any sort of context whatsoever. Well, sometimes, look, I like to think that we're on the same page. Sometimes you'll send me a text that has no context whatsoever, and it just flies right over me. The benefit of that is it's not cryptic, and I know that it's always harmless, and I can always be like, hey, what do you mean about this? When you post something like that on social media, and you're the 5-star guy that's got everybody looking at everything you do, no matter what you post, and then you post that stuff, yes, you are always going to get taken into whatever sort of context that fits that narrative in that moment. And that's what we did with Luther Burden. We did it with Malik Neighbors.
Bit weird though, because I will say that like I really do think RG3 kind of created that. I mean, so he was almost responding to what RG3 did, and then people were reacting to the reactions. Because like that's one of those. And as a fan of a team like Mizzou, and I feel this with the Pelicans, it's like you feel like your team is only being talked about when there's something bad happening. So it's like it wouldn't shock me if like the next day First Take had like a Luther Burden segment. It's like you guys don't care about Luther Burden, you don't care about Mizzou, you're just trying to follow this trend. So I think that when you get to that point, the player has to like put out a statement that puts him in a bad position because, you know, you always want your guy to be like, well, you know, just trust in the process. But at the same time, if you're him, you're like, bro, I got 2 targets. Like, I am kind of frustrated. I feel like it could help us win this one, actually. You know, so I see both sides of it.
I do see both sides of it. I definitely think that there are other,
there are better ways to do it. Yeah.
There are better ways to do it. And there are, more seasoned people in this business who would not have gone that route that RG3 chose that day, which was why we talked about it and why it was relevant and why it was something where, you know, you got to write follow-up stories for stuff like that, because
he was thinking like a player, and which he's, you know, been pretty close to his playing career, which is like, if that was me, how would I feel? And it's like, well, it's not you. It's
yeah. And this wasn't a season-long thing. I mean, he clears the air by going on Twitter and he says, Mizzou fans, don't misunderstand my intentions. I'm always a Tiger. Just be patient. Here we come. Drink actually came out that week and said, you know, he was banged up in the second quarter. You know, his only job after that was to be able to return punts after that point, which I disagree because he was getting targets in the second half of that game. I don't know what I remember thinking.
Our guy's banged up. We're gonna let return punts. Okay.
Yeah, like of all the things to let someone do on a football field when they're not at their best. Yeah, let's.
We trust this freshman to cleanly catch a punt, and he's gonna get lit up. That's the only play in college football where you can still actually get lit up fairly. Okay.
You know how I like to keep my players healthy is I put them at a standing position, and then I let everybody on a defense run full speed at them. That's the best way to go about it. It was just weird energy. Yeah. It was weird energy all around. What was being covered up, what wasn't, TBD on. I mean, I guess not really TBD, but it was one of those weird situations. So all that went into Burden's early time at Mizzou. It was very eventful. It was. If you were asking me then, how do you think things are going to play out? What's this going to look like? What's his career going to end up being at a place like Mizzou? I wouldn't have been overly optimistic. There were some, dare I say, Keyshawn Boutte vibes, which turned out to be a different story entirely. And I almost don't liken anything to the Keyshawn Boutte story with what we know now about some of the gambling stuff and all of that. Different can of worms that he opened up ultimately. But that freshman season for Burden might not have been that memorable from a statistical standpoint. It was not Amari Cooper. It wasn't Julio Jones. It wasn't Christian Kirk. But I think Burden learned a lot about route running in this conference and what it takes to be able to succeed in this league, because Mizzou did something that I don't know that a lot of teams in their spot would have. They let him work through those growing pains. They really did. They kept him out there on that field. They tried different ways to try and move him around and said, you know what, just trust us. This is going to be tough, but even if we take some licks for games like that, it's going to be worth it in the end. And even though you kind of look at it and you're like 375 receiving yards, that's not, is this guy going to be a bust? Like without proper context, you could go that route. But Burden was the third SEC true freshman receiver since 2012 to have at least 8 touchdowns from scrimmage. The other 2 being George Pickens, Amari Cooper. That stood out to me because I don't know if you've seen Amari Cooper, George Pickens. They're a little bit different than Luther Burden. They just are. And yet he joined that company as a sub 6 foot receiver who lined up out wide 85% of the time. So I like that. What I give Mizzou and Burden so much credit for is saying, guys, let's all kumbaya. Let's get on the same page here. Let's make each other better and let's go. And that's exactly what happened in 2023. For my money, Burden was one of the 5 best receivers in the sport. He really was. 9th in the country in receiving yards. He had 86 catches, 9 receiving scores. PFF graded him just behind Marvin Harrison Jr. and Rome Odunze for 7th in FBS, but he actually finished with a better receiving grade than those guys and was behind only the likes of Malik Neighbors, Malik Washington. No relation to the two Maliks. The game that Burden played the fewest amount of snaps was against Memphis. He had 34 snaps that game. Also had a career high with 10 catches for 177 yards. It was unguardable.
Easy day at the office. PTO.
No big deal. He was unreal.
Half day?
Yeah, little half day. No big deal. I'm just going to get behind a secondary. You know what? I'm kind of tired from running this 60-yard route downfield. Give me a breather drink. I'm good to go. Yeah, that's crazy efficiency. He can do that, and he can just take over at a moment's notice. The first half of last season felt like every game was that. He had, in the first 6 games last year, his worst receiving output was 96 yards. He had at least 114 receiving yards in those 5 other games. In those first 6 games, he had 793 receiving yards on 54 catches. He was insane. He had more than double his production from a year ago, and that was just in 6 games. Don't think he was at 100% for the second half of the year. He was still plenty effective. And look, an important part of their offense, and he needed to be on the field, even if he wasn't necessarily getting in and out of his breaks like you would want all the time. And yeah, maybe he took a playoff or two, but still his presence was vital, even when he wasn't torching teams for 150 yards. That Kentucky game, he got hit in the nuts at least once in that game. Tom Hart had a line. I can't remember what that line was, but I remember thinking, oh, he got hit in the goodies pretty bad. And that did not look fun. I don't know how much that impacted him the rest of the day.
I would imagine a good bit.
Yeah, we've all been there. We've all been there. I don't even like, going to the kitchen to be able to get a glass of water after Claire knocks me, there when I'm standing up or something. So look, to play a tackle football game, I get it. I fully understand it. He had a 15-yard game. Probably the biggest sign of how different things were for Mizzou in 2023 compared to 2022, a year earlier, where we're talking about that Auburn game and how bad it was that he didn't get these touches late in a game that they couldn't get anything going offensively. But a year later against Kentucky, they blew out the Cats on the road. I mean, blew them out, and he's not a factor. And that, for my money, was the first sign that Mizzou was taking on new life, and his uninvolvement actually told a bigger story. Luther Burden made guys around him better. He made matchups easier on the outside for your boy Theo Weiss. There's no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. His breakout season happened, in my opinion, the Theo Weiss breakout season that many had been waiting for. I'm sure Oklahoma fans were watching that going, dang, why couldn't he do that with us? It happens because when you command so much attention like that, you're not getting those double teams. You're just not. And, teams couldn't load the box necessarily against Cody Schrader. And yeah, maybe Luther Burden makes Cody Schrader better too, because if these safeties are peeking at this slot receiver who's like, man, is this guy about to run past me? It's a little bit different. You can't necessarily get downhill and help out in the box. You can't just focus all of your attention on Burden on third down either, because if you do that, then Brady Cook is going to break off, a 15-yard run and be able to move the chains. It opened up this offense, and it was kind of like the last piece of the puzzle. And because of his understanding of route running that he gained as a true freshman, it wasn't just simply, hey, we're gonna try and attack downfield, and if you can't get open, oh well. There were so many different things that you could do with him, his feel for zone, like all these different nerdy things about football that you can dig into that I'm sure plenty of NFL people are already very aware of, that he was able to do as a second-year player. The change in role that he had was something that we talked about a lot. Okay, it's going to continue to be a subject of fascination for me because you usually just don't see that year to year. Remember how I said freshman year he played 85% of his snaps out wide, and that was because Don Lovett, he's the more established player. He operated primarily out of slot. 85% of the time, he's lining up out wide. Lovett's transfer to Georgia and Burden's position switch meant that in 2023, he played 82% of his snaps in the slot. They said, you are our primary slot guy. This is how we want to be able to maximize your abilities. We think we can get mismatches galore, and they did. I would expect that number to get a lot closer to 50%. May not be quite the 50-50 split that Malik Neighbors had, where he was truly as interchangeable a receiver as there was in college football. But ideally, I think that's how Kirby Moore would like to be able to use Burden in these spots, just so that you could have those times where he's lining up and pre-snap, Brady Cook looks over and it's like, well, that's an automatic 20. That's a barbecue great kill. That's barbecue chicken. That's it right there. Having a guy like that is so unbelievably rare. A lot of guys think they have someone like that, but to have someone that's established that just knows, he knows, and chances are that DB lining up across from him, or God bless if it's an inside linebacker that's got to line up across Luther Burden, he knows as well. Okay, no tough Borlands of the world lining up against Luther Burden. We know how that's going to end. Kirby Moore.
Let me say real quick, because this actually relates to both things. There is that when I say like he followed this like storybook path, there is just such a specific moment where I looked at him and went, "This is going to work." Oh my god! And it was during that Kansas State game when they were in that like really interesting like in the round action, and it drew the whole defense like across the field to kind of the weak side of the field, and they run like this cross with him and Weiss is like wide open. Okay, because I had to go watch this back. I was like, "Huh, Weiss is wide open underneath," which is probably like the hot route, but you could see Brady Cook going, he's going to burn these guys.
Yep.
And by the time the ball gets there, he has like 4 body lengths of separation. Like, because I remember that play being a quote unquote broken play. When Brady Cook lets this ball go, there's a guy on him, and then there's just not, because Brady Cook puts it in front of him, and he's just like, this guy's not going to catch you. And like that's the exact moment where you look for as like a fan of the game and go, wow, this isn't going to be Evan Stewart. This is going to be a guy who now has a play caller in Kirby Moore that can say a 50-50 ball, that's an 80-20 ball for you. So like, yeah, I was at the Georgia tailgate actually for the South Carolina game, watching that in LSU at the same time. I remember seeing that and being like, Mizzou's probably going to be fine. And then they have that crazy end of the game as well, which you could say was exercising some demons. So yeah, for Burden specifically and for Mizzou in general, that Kansas State game was huge.
It was. And that ability to recognize what he can do for you over the top, even when a team might think you have a good matchup on him, just a game changer. It truly is. And the ball tracking skills are obviously, so unbelievably impressive. And the compliment to actually have guys around him who can, warrant that type of attention is a big part of this. But yeah, having someone in there like a Kirby Moore, there's a reason to, and this maybe gets lost in the shuffle of this season of his presence, of having a guy who is your primary play caller that isn't your head coach. One of the reasons why I don't like it in this day and age to have a head coach as a primary play caller, unless you are elite of the elite and there's just no other option. But one of the things that I think can happen is you spend so much time focusing on getting that next call and focusing on, hey, what's it going to look like? What are we doing the next 3-4 plays? What are we doing if this happens, that happens? And so much of the conversation with Burden in 2022 was related to his usage. And, hey, he hasn't gotten a target since the first quarter. It's end of the third quarter. What are we doing here? Hey, why isn't he getting pop passes? You know what I never worried about last year was Luther Burden's usage, ever. You don't have to worry about that when you have multiple people that are accounting for that. And you're not necessarily like, hey, Drink just kind of missed that one. And that happens. I understand how that can happen with all that you have to take on if you're going to be calling plays as a head coach. I mean, you look at the numbers last year, and I mean, it was a dream. 86 catches, including the 7 runs, 93 scrimmage touches he had in 13 games. Go back and tell 2022 Mizzou fan who's watching that Auburn game, just pulling their hair out, losing their mind about his usage. Go back and tell him that Luther Burden the following year would have 93 scrimmage touches for an 11-win Mizzou team. They would have kissed you on the mouth. They would have been giddy. Burden did the thing that I think we all assume 5-star receivers are destined to do, but few can break through, at least not until their pre-draft season. Few can break through the way that Burden did as a second-year player. He took his lumps. He bought into the system. He bought into the program. He had that superstar year 2 where he was capable of taking over any game. Probably not capable of taking over at less than 100% against Georgia, but he did have that big touchdown early in that one as well, which reminded you, yeah, this cat is pretty good. He can get over the top of a defense no matter who you are, but it's hard to put a ceiling on his game. It really is. As long as he is healthy, it is hard for me to sit here and say, yeah, you know what, this is kind of where he maxes out at. I think you can credit a lot of different things to that, and they're all things that Burden has working in his favor this year as well. I think having the same quarterback, having the same play caller, same offense, same complementary receivers, all of those things are huge pluses in why he projects to have an even better year. He might have the occasional dud game like he had against Kentucky where a team just basically says, nope, you're going to get bracket coverage. you're not beating us tonight, no matter where you line up. We are going to be following you everywhere. But I'm just so fired up for chapter 3 of the Luther Burden experience. I think it's going to be fantastic. I went back and watched some highlights today while I was eating lunch, and his ability to do what you said against Kansas State, where he just explodes out of his break. It's uncanny how he can split a secondary and just think, hey, we've got this guy covered. It's all good. We've got 2 different guys who kind of have eyes on him, one eye in the backfield, maybe on the quarterback. And then he's just gone, and he's over the top, and it's 2 or 3 or 4 steps of separation that he's able to get and track down the football. That expands the route tree and why you just can't guard him like he's operating out of the slot. It's a difficult thing to do. My guy Tyler Brook pointed out that he had 3.29 yards per route run, which was 7th in FBS. Super rare for a slot receiver. Very, very rare. Not what you would expect from a sub 6-foot receiver as well. Another tip of the cap to Kirby Moore to recognize that you could exploit some matchups with that. The ball skills are always going to be there. They're always going to stand out. That's how you can become a 5-star recruit without being the 6'3", 6'4", George Pickens, Cam Coleman, get off the bus, immediately notice that guy. You see his feel for the game when he'll keep his eyes on the ball. He'll make a cut almost simultaneously before a defender can even react. And that's something that is so hard to do. And if you get coached out of doing that because that's how you start dropping footballs, but he doesn't. And that's an unbelievable skill to be able to have. He had 710 receiving yards after the catch, 3rd most in FBS. He broke 32 tackles, 5th in FBS. He averaged 8.4 yards after his catches last year. That is slippery. That is really hard to do, and that is toughness from a guy who's 208 pounds, who hasn't missed a game in his college career, despite the fact that he's had bumps and bruises in game that he's kind of had to work through. If he stays healthy, Will, I think he's capable of having a 90-catch, 1,400-yard, 12 receiving touchdown type season, which would be all sorts of historically prolific. Only 2 SEC receivers have checked all 3 of those boxes in a season. That is 90 catches, 1,400 yards, 12 receiving touchdowns. Can you name those 2 receivers?
Devontae Smith and Jamar Chase.
Devontae Smith did not.
Oh, my gosh. Wow. Huh. Jamar Chase did?
Jamar Chase did not either, actually.
Oh, my gosh. You went 0 for 2 on that? I know they're at the top of the record book. Yeah, who am I missing?
Justin Jefferson.
On the same team, I got it wrong? Electric. Okay.
And Amari Cooper. Devontae Smith. Here, look this up. And it's because of COVID. It's definitely because of the COVID
season.
And
that was my thought there. And I knew Amari Cooper was like the stats guy for Alabama, but I'm like, man, I guess it's like a per game thing. But yeah, no, that's a good one. And I'll say this too really quick on touches, because I think you like touched on this and like actually made a related point. But I'll say this, like Drink very much in his first year with Luther Burden gave like over kind of like a dad in like one of these rom-com like Hallmark movies where he's like, oh, my shop's falling in disrepair. What am I going to do? I'm going to try everything. Let me just try to do like hold the sign outside. And it's like, if you look at it, as kind of a head coach, right? It's like, how do I get this guy touches? It's like, okay, we're going to give him rushing attempts and punt returns. And that's not going to help you if it's Luther Burden. Now, maybe wait
a minute. I stand corrected. Devontae Smith did indeed do this. 2020, he did do this. We're counting that. That was a horrible, horrible omission on my part.
Okay.
I did not
mean different LSU receiver. There we go. Okay. That's much closer than I thought it was. Okay.
I did not mean to disrespect the great Devontae Smith. I had to look that up because I was like, wait a minute, Connor, you might have messed that up. I definitely messed that up. Continue. Sorry.
Anyway, so yeah, it's like Drake was like kind of just disheveled, like trying to find ways to get him the ball. And he did that through rushing attempts and punt returns, right? But to our point, where do you get hit the hardest? Punt returns and then rushing attempts, especially if you're a guy that's the best player in your offense. You're going to get extra licks on you in rushing attempts and punt returns, right? Because that's the only free shot the defense will often have at you. Well, to your point, okay, boom, your yards per catch and your average double from year 1 and 2. Because you're not trying to remember running plays. You're not trying to be gassed because you're running up and down the field. Yeah, he had like one good punt return game against Abilene Christian. Y'all need that? Y'all glad y'all did that? You know what I'm saying? Like that moved the needle for you to give him 4 punt returns for 100-something yards on a TD? Like that didn't translate to anything. And then you're in a weird spot because now you've seen he can do it. So point being, like, that's what happens when you kind of, I just say get an adult in the room, but get someone whose dedicated job is that. Because we've seen Drink be a great play caller at his last stop, right? But to do all the SEC stuff, like the roles and the jobs and the rules are getting longer, where it's like, well, now we don't just have to win, but we got to keep our guys involved, keep drama out of the locker room, make sure the paychecks are right, make sure all this stuff. And you got to, Robert Griffin III or whoever is saying you got to get this guy touches. So if you're in year one, you're just kind of like, I'll try everything. But then you get this new guy near Kirby Moore, and it's like, wait, no, what if he's just a really, 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 really good wide receiver? Like, what if we just, instead of, and that's so brilliant, taking him from the outside and rushing attempts and punt returns to, we're going to put you in the slot where you get the best matchups. First line is always going to be barbecue chicken. It's either going to be a nickel, a linebacker, or a DB who's not where he's supposed to be or comfortable with, that you're going to be making these quick moves on. And then boom, exactly what you just said. Boom, missed tackle rate flies through the roof. Average catch flies through the roof. Because now he's getting able to catch the ball and then make a decision naturally versus like, okay, wait, this is a punt left, right? Where's my gunner going to be? Whatever. So point being, like, yeah, I'm actually really glad that they just made him play receiver, but they kind of had to do what they had to do, because if it had just been the targets, he may not still be at Mizzou. So I get it,
Yeah, you have to find ways to get him the football. You can't just have these games where you're having a random, defensive back out there catching punts and Luther Burden is on the bench having not caught a pass in that game. I mean, just for pure optics and trying to make sure that guy's involved. Like, I think part of the scheming that they did in the red zone his freshman year was done entirely just to get him good vibes.
Yep.
Like, you look at some of the ways that they would try and get him the football.
Screen pass at the goal line. I was like, what have I seen that to a number one receiver? What?
Yeah, and look, you might say, like, all right, take that for what it is, but guys want to have fun playing football.
Yeah.
They want to get into the end zone and celebrate with their teammates. And when you're a 6-win team, like, you need to do those things. You just absolutely do. Even if it's sometimes obvious that you're doing that, which I thought it was, you need to make sure that guy is involved no matter what. So yeah, I loved what they did year 2, what they recognized with Kirby Moore, that with his usage. And, if he does check those boxes, which Devontae Smith definitely checked. Don't know why I omitted him. Never omit Devontae Smith from a receiver conversation with the SEC. But if he hits 90 catches, 1,400 yards, 12 receiving touchdowns, that would put him in this company where he would be 8th in receiving in SEC history. He would hit 220 catches. He'd be the 8th person to do that. He would be the 9th SEC receiver ever to hit 3,000 career receiving yards. Like, Neighbors just did that recently to be able to break the LSU record. And he would be tied for 10th in SEC history in receiving touchdowns. I think top 10 among SEC players in all 3 major categories is in play. It really is. The guys on that list check all 3 of those boxes. Devontae Smith, one of them, obviously one of them. Amari Cooper, that's it. That's the list. If Luther Burden does that, and even if he doesn't, even if he falls just short of that, but if he's all over the SEC leaderboard by the end of this season, which I think is very possible before he goes off to the NFL and, likely becomes a first-round receiver. And if he does that from a Mizzou team that makes the 12-team playoff, we're talking about quite the legacy. And I think that is all part of the conversation and what he has done to be able to change this program. A guy that has the potential to be one of the most beloved Mizzou players ever if it finishes the way that it could based on what we saw from him last year. And really, in my opinion, the things that he did well his freshman year as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a joke going around about, here at Mizzou, we win Blitnikoff Awards, right? I don't know if you saw that tweet. They got community noted.
No, I've not seen that.
It was so funny. It was at Mizzou, we're not worried about winning X or whatever. We're worried about the Blitnikoff. And there's a community note that says, actually, a Mizzou player has never won the Blitnikoff Award. So I will go. It was because one of the fans replied and they go, actually, Heisman. And then they community noted that. They were like, they've never won Heisman either. That felt a little bit extra. That second one was aggressive. But point being, let me ask you this question. What would be at this point, a disappointing season for him? Do you think that not getting an invite to the Blitnikoff Award would be a disappointment for Luther Burden?
That's probably a little bit unfair because
assuming health, right?
Assuming health, I think that's the expectation. But I think there is a little bit more room for interpretation. If he's not an all-SEC receiver at season's end, that's a disappointment. If we're talking about Luther Burden and he only had 800 yards or something like that, 900 yards in a healthy season, and we're talking about, how he's more of the decoy and he's kind of another guy, I'd be disappointed because he's proven to be almost matchup proof. And so the expectation is a lot higher. Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about less than 1,000 yards, if he's not the best player on the field when he steps on it, I think that's more so the disappointment that we'd be talking about with him. But it's probably not fair to say like, oh yeah, it's a disappointment if he's not one of the 3 best receivers in college football.
I think it is. I think that he's like kind of at that point. You know what I'm saying? Like I think that he was, and really it was just kind of about the offense and the way the season went. And to your point, like having like a down game there, like this last year, that it was Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr. He has a last name, so we got to put him up there. I think the amount of receivers last year is the reason why he wasn't in the conversation this year, because I think he was deserving of an invite. There were just so many good receivers on like playoff teams and Malik Neighbors whose numbers were just stupid.
Marvin Harrison Jr. is a really good player. He didn't have as good of a year as Malik Neighbors. Right. I think we could agree on that. He's not just a last name. I need you to acknowledge that he's not just a last name. He might have gotten things.
Burden this year is going to be better than Marvin Harrison last year. How about that?
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. All right, I like that. We'll close on that. Let's kick it to my guy Brad. We'll talk some SEC quarterback rankings with him. Which, by the way, I forgot to say this in the interview, but you can find my full post-spring quarterback ranking SaturdayDownSouth.com. We do not go through 1 through 16, so this will not be the place where we dissect all of those. But just know that Brad and I are very, very similar, and not just because we both have Carson Beck at 1, Quinn Ewers at 2. We also dig into some Dabo things after his super, super awkward transfer portal comment earlier in the week. And then we're going to close with everyone's favorite topic, the new college football video game. So here's Brad. Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is my guy, Brad Crawford. Brad, I want to get into some SEC quarterback rankings with you a little bit. We'll talk a little EA Sports, college football video game at the end here. But, man, we got to talk Dabo. We're dads. We say cringe stuff, but why is Dabo's cringe so bad? All he has to do in this quote that comes out from ACC PM, all he has to do is just say, like, yeah, we hosted some transfers, it didn't work out, and then just be done with it. Just move on. And instead, he says the cringe line after of technically every player's a transfer. We just signed a whole class of guys transferring from high school. Why must Dabo be this way?
It just makes you roll your eyes, man. And this is another one of those classic Dabo-isms of trying to deflect what's coming, which is probably a 8-4 lackluster based on expectation season. I actually wrote down some of my favorite Dabo-isms for this segment. BYOG, bring your own guts. He said that a few years ago. It's only unthinkable if you don't think it. That's Dabo. No shine without the grind. And then my favorite is greatness is never on sale. You got to pay full price.
Look.
I mean, come on, man.
Hey, they're building a team after God's name, image, and likeness, which look,
that's a good one too. And now he's talking about graduation rates. And when college football coaches start touting their graduation rates, then it's like, man, I might not make the playoff in 2024.
This ain't UMass, man. Like, what are we
exactly?
What are we doing here? I mean, which guys? That's I think part of this that gets a little bit lost in the shuffle is. He did say that they were actually looking at guys, and he didn't just straight up shun the transfer portal.
Sure.
I had heard that ETN was a legitimate target that Clemson was going after, so I assume that's one of the few guys. But based on what you've heard, who is Clemson even looking at as a potential option in the transfer portal? And did they have to have bloodlines to Clemson at some way, like it seems like all of these guys do if they're getting any sort of interest?
Yeah, offensive line was definitely a position of need for Clemson. It's a new look offensive front there. Obviously, wide receiver. Man, the last couple of years, the Tigers haven't had dogs at that position. T. Higgins is probably the last great wide receiver they've had. And Cade Klubnik needs that because he's been a pretty inconsistent quarterback through the first year and a half or so of his tenure at Clemson. Also, offensive line, wide receiver. And then, obviously, as you mentioned, running back. Losing Will Shipley a year early to the NFL draft is huge. They've got Maffa coming back, but he's never been a featured guy. Obviously, he can be that, but you would have liked to have, signed a guy like ETN, and instead Georgia does. But if I'm Dabo Swinney, man, players want to play at top 10 programs, but right now I don't know if Clemson is in that range because they don't take portal guys. So, when I'm a 5-star wide receiver and I'm not getting burned at my current school, I'm not even thinking Clemson when I enter the portal because, one, they're not probably interested in me, and, two, there's no proven talent that has shown they can go to Clemson as a portal guy and play well. So I don't know Dabo's game plan right now, but he does have 2 national championships in the last 6 or 7 years, which is 2 more than Lincoln Riley and Ryan Day and Brian Kelly combined. So
yeah, look, it's fair, and you can spin it that way. I mean, if you're an optimist about Clemson, you could say, well, they're 32nd in Bill Connolly's updated percentage of returning production. That's
right.
Good. You got your starting quarterback back. That's good. You've got an offensive coordinator who, if he gets to call his own plays, Garrett Riley, you feel good about that. But I'd be worried about a defense that's a year further removed from Brent Venables that just lost 5 guys to the NFL draft. Dabo fires his O-line coach. He fires his D-line coach. You're going to be very new look in those areas, as you mentioned, especially on the offensive line. I can't even get to justifying Clemson on the heels of 3 consecutive finishes outside the top 10. I can't justify Clemson being a 10-2 team that gets into the playoff. When you're doing these early projections, have you even got there yet?
Yeah, 10 wins is going to be tough for Clemson. Although the schedule outside of Florida State and Georgia is favorable, that means Clemson goes 10-0 against the other 10 games. And we haven't seen it the last couple of years. Dabo has lost some games, like an at NC State maybe. That's going to be tough. But I don't know. I don't see Clemson right now as a 10-win team either. I don't have Clemson in the playoff. I actually think Virginia Tech might be a surprise team in the ACC. And Florida State and Miami are my 2 top teams right now in that league based on what they've done this offseason. Miami spent more money in the portal than any program in college football. So this is the time for Mario Cristobal.
Yeah, that over-under is 9.5 wins in the regular season for Miami,
Crazy.
which, yeah, that's pretty nuts. I was thinking about this. If Dabo were in the SEC, I'd love to know what the conversation would be about his buyout. I would love to know because he agreed to one of those 10-year extensions at the start of 2022, which is, that's when it was all the rage. But you look at that contract, which runs through 2031. It was 10 years, $115 million. I don't know when he's going to get a raise or a new deal off of that based on the way things are going. If he's fired at any point in the next 2 seasons, Brad, it's $60 million. $60 million. And then if he's fired in 2026, the buyout drops all the way down to, wait for it, $57 million still. And then if my math is correct, that it's still, after 2027, it's still $49 million to fire him. This is an unfireable contract, even if this continues and if Clemson starts to miss out on the college football playoff, which is going to feel magnified in the 12-team era. Is this any sort of deal that Clemson can wiggle its way out of, or is this pretty much Dabo has signed his lifetime contract?
I think Dabo Swinney is going to leave Death Valley on his own accord. And that's probably the best for both parties. Now, if I'm Dabo Swinney, like you said, I mean, I've got a, generational check waiting on me if, I do get fired for on field results. But I think Dabo Swinney, and we saw it this time, with the Alabama opening, his name was kind of in that top 5 mix, along with a few others. That showed me that, maybe he is looking to jump. And I think right now, his time there is wearing out a bit. I mean, there's a contingent of Clemson fans on every social media platform who, if Dabo was fired tomorrow, they would be excited that they're getting a new coach. That's just the state of college football, man. If you haven't won a title in the last 5 years, you're nothing. So, I think Dabo Swinney is still a top 5 coach. I wouldn't put him in the top 3 right now, but he's a guy that if I was starting a program, I would certainly hire Dabo Swinney.
Over under 1.5 Clemson playoff appearances the next 4 years.
I'd go 2. I'd go 2 of the next 4. Because, well, and I'm going to say that because I think in 2026, we're going to see another expansion.
Oh, yeah, true.
There's going to be even more spots. And as long as Clemson's in the ACC, I think Dabo is an average of a 9 to 10 win coach. Now, if they move to the Big Ten or SEC, I think the game changes considerably for Dabo.
Okay, let's talk SEC quarterback rankings. We both did them. if you were just looking at both of ours, you'd be like, did you guys just like do this as a group project? Because
they're very similar.
really similar, man. Like there are only 3 spots I saw where we had separation of at least two rankings. And there weren't any more than like 2 spots apart. So our biggest disagreements, this is going to sound bad. Blake Shapen, I had at 14, you had at 12. Okay. Graham Mertz, I had it. Yeah. Graham Mertz, I had at 9, you had him at 7. And Connor Wigman, I had him at 6 while you had him at 8. I was hoping we were going to be able to kind of like have a good hearty debate about any one of these guys, but I don't think we disagree on a whole lot. How about one of those 3 guys? Talk me into why you had them ranked where you did, maybe between Shapen, Mertz, and Wigman.
Yeah, so we can start at Mertz. I'm a little bit higher on Graham Mertz than I guess most national analysts. Part of that is because I had him 14th this time last year in the SEC, and he goes out and has 20 touchdown passes, 3 picks. That's kind of a trend with me, man. Once I rank a guy last in May, he has a decent year a few months later. But I was most impressed with Graham Mertz this spring that he was able to hold off DJ Lagway, for first team reps, and now he's going to be a second-year starter at Florida. I do think we see Lagway play some this season, not necessarily because Graham Mertz is going to play bad, but if Florida's 2-5 in late October, Napier needs to show the fan base and boosters the future of the program before he's let go. So I think it's a very good quarterback room there in Gainesville. I don't know how it's going to work out with all you have is Eugene Wilson on the outside, and that's about it right now, and no featured back besides Montrell Johnson. But yes, Graham Mertz is 7th for me, and you mentioned Connor at Texas A&M. It's going to be very interesting to see how that offense evolves with Colin Klein. Losing Evan Stewart to Oregon was huge. I think he's the top wideout transfer in this 2024 cycle, former 5-star. But if I'm Evan Stewart, I made the right decision because I wasn't getting the football enough, man. I wasn't getting enough targets. He had 4 touchdowns last year. He's a guy that should have 10 or 12 touchdowns, But yeah, Wigman's a guy that the first few starts last year had like 9 touchdowns, 2 picks, and had a really good September. So he's a guy that can elevate Texas A&M if the defense is good, and both sides of the ball have been kind of rebuilt through the portal.
Yeah, I like Wigman a lot, and it's no secret to people listening to the show. I think that the limited sample size has been just so encouraging despite all the moving pieces. Yeah. I love what he does against the blitz, against pressure. I just think that's the type of guy that you can build around and who can handle some crap, because that's kind of what he's had to go through so far. And obviously it's a different regime in there, but I think a regime that could actually help him in some of the things that he does particularly well. Yeah, Mertz is going to be fascinating. Mertz is one of the most intriguing players in the SEC just because of the Lagway element, because of all that. And like, if he's decent though, does Billy actually say, I know we're 4-1 or something like that, but you know what? I got to show the people more Lagway. I don't know. Like, I think that's going to be such a tricky thing to have to manage. And it's hard to come up with a comp because of the circumstances surrounding Billy.
Sure. And if Florida beats Miami in, that 3:30 game opening weekend and Graham Mertz has 325 and 4 touchdowns, you're not going to see Lagway in September. Graham has that job, but that's very interesting, man. And a few of these coaches on the hot seat, Napier and Sam Pittman in the SEC, they need elite quarterback play to get to bowl season this year, because both those schedules in Fayetteville and Gainesville are among the most brutal in college football.
Blake Shapen, Jordan Ta'amu vibes. Any possibility of that?
I like the offense he's in. Does that count? I mean, that offense is going to produce by default, right?
I would think. But the receivers, the Justin Robinson transfer portal decision, you're kind of looking around going, man, I don't know that they got those dudes on the outside. They have a quarterback and maybe even an offensive line that's all right, that can hold up in certain situations. But that's probably why I'm a little bit lower on him, despite the fact that he's actually one of the more accomplished quarterbacks in the SEC coming back when you look at, career yards and stuff, the stuff that he did at Baylor. But yeah, I have him at 14. So maybe that's my good luck spot. You're 14 is kind of the curse for you. Who did you have at 14 this year? I should have asked that.
Let me see. 14, I think I had Taylon Green at Arkansas.
That's good then.
Because I had Lenora Sellers at 15, which to be honest, my rankings after Jackson Arnold at 10, 11 through 16, man, is going to be interchangeable. And we see that every year. I mean, there's going to be guys based on the talent around them that either have a good year or not. And one of the reasons I put Lenora Sellers, Gamecocks quarterback, at 15 is we haven't seen him throw yet against, a formidable defense. The offensive line may have a freshman starter at one of the tackle spots, and then brand new backfield, and there's not a wide receiver one right now. So regardless of how good the coaching staff feels Lenora Sellers is, I mean, there's not a ton of weaponry around him. In SEC, you got to have that.
I agree. And we had Sellers in the same spot, despite the fact that there is obviously some promise, and it's pretty telling the way that he's been given this opportunity in spring to make a bigger splash in the portal. I agree with you. I think the cutoff is 10. Like I think there are 10 quarterbacks, as crazy as it sounds. I think there are 10 quarterbacks that have all SEC upside with Arnold at 10. And that's a wild sentence to say, but I was thinking about this too. Who do you think is the better path to an all SEC season? Milroe or Nico Iamaleava?
I think Iamaleava does. I think Nico is going to be one of the rising stars in college football this season, partly because Tennessee's wide receivers around him, I think, are better than what Milroe has at Alabama.
True.
I know that might be sacrilegious to say, but, I mean, Tennessee has 3 returning starters. Dante Thornton's a guy that didn't play all that much last year, but they're expecting big things out of him finally. They got a star tight end out of the portal. And then Milroe has a guy behind him in Ty Simpson, man, that I think the leash isn't going to be all that long on Jalen Milroe, despite him being a preseason Heisman candidate. I'm really not sure if he's the perfect fit in Kalen DeBoer's offense. And for Jalen Milroe to be, an all-SEC guy, DeBoer's going to have to run him a little bit more than he did Michael Penix and everybody else he's coached at the quarterback spot. So Bama's still a team. I don't have them as a preseason playoff team in my early projections, but I do have 4 SEC teams in, and I think that 4th spot comes down to LSU, Bama, or Missouri.
Okay, on the subject of Milroe, I agree with you that there's going to take some back and forth with he and DeBoer in this offense. He's so different from Michael Penix and what he wants to be able to do. But at the same time, because we saw Milroe finish the year the way that he did those last 2 months and be the player that he was,
right?
It's kind of, in my opinion, it's kind of a knock on DeBoer if we see him struggle. And if we do have those questions about that leash, and if we are having conversations about Ty Simpson, I don't know, man. Like I've seen Milroe be a really good player. I saw him be the best player on the field in an SEC championship game to prevent Georgia from three-peating. Like there's some of that would have to come back to DeBoer if this doesn't really work out. And I would probably put more blame on the head coach even in that spot than Milroe, despite the fact that I think we see some of the flaws in his game so far.
I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of progress and development Jalen Milroe has made. Is he a top 15 pick in 2025? Is he a mid-round quarterback if he doesn't play well this season? It's going to be very interesting to me. And, I mean, I think really that the straw that stirs the drink for the Alabama offense is going to be Justice Haynes and Miller and the running backs. We didn't see a ton of production at the running back spot last year. Milroe had to run for his life a lot. And, you talk about like sack rate and guys who when they're pressured, bad things happen. Milroe and Shedeur Sanders were toward the bottom of college football last season when that happened. So he's still a guy that in the open field, man, he's going to make you miss. And, he's a guy that could have a Jaden Daniels type rushing season. But, I mean, I don't see a 3,500-yard passer out of Milroe. And a lot of that maybe is not his fault. When Jeremy Bernard is going to be your wide receiver one, I mean, there's some issues there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about Bernard too, but maybe it'll look different with Milroe. Like some of the stuff that he looks like in the first 2 seconds after getting the football, where he now feels like he has an idea where the football is going to end up, and it's not at his ankles or something like that, even in a playoff game. So that means when we do these all SEC ballots in the preseason coming up here, with those top 3 spots, you won't have Milroe, the guy who finished higher in the Heisman voting than any returning player in college football. You won't have him as one of your preseason all-SEC guys because you'll have Beck at that first spot, then you'd have Ewers at second, and then Dart at 3. That's going to feel weird too, I would imagine.
It does, and that speaks to, I think, those 3 guys on those elite teams ahead of Jalen Milroe are going to be better than Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and Ole Miss. And you look at what Jackson Dart, I mean, I put him at 3. I strongly considered putting him ahead of Quinn Ewers at number 2 based on what he has around him. Not only does he bring back Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins, but they stole South Carolina's top returning offensive player in Juice Wells. And then he has a tight end who might be an early round pick as well, multi-year starter. So Lane Kiffin has a wealth of riches offensively with Jackson Dart back. And like I said, those 2 guys ahead of him, I think are probably going to be the top 2 quarterbacks off the board next spring.
Okay, these leaked EA Sports covers. I got some thoughts on them. I'm kind of
I can't wait for this game, man. You know I'm amped for it. I played it religiously growing up.
Who's your first non-South Carolina dynasty team?
Well, I've joined Jake Crane's planned online dynasty, and I'm going to play as USF down there in Tampa, pretty close to you.
Let's go.
Byron Brown's going to have a 6,000-yard season for me at quarterback. It's going to be fun, but I'm looking forward, man, to just the new uniform options these last 10 years that we're going to see, and custom stadiums, and how much recruiting is going to change. I mean, look at NIL. I mean, just everything, man. The world has changed in college football the last decade, and I hope these game developers include some of that.
Brad, you're going to be the guy that's going to spend more time messing around with helmets and uniforms than you are
playing actual
the game
gameplay. Of course. Cleats, all of it. Yeah.
What is it? Okay, maybe I'm just stirring the pot here for the sake of stirring the pot, but I thought it was interesting Shedeur Sanders wasn't on the cover. I think everybody kind of penciled him in, or at least in the leaked covers, I should say. The leaked covers, TBD on what that looks like. But seeing Travis Hunter there as a guy who's shown up on both of them and not having Shedeur, would there have been outrage in college football if Colorado from a 4-8 team had 2 guys on that cover?
Travis seems a little more likable than Shedeur. Some of the things Shedeur's done publicly recently has been kind of a head turner. But Travis, man, he's always all smiles. He's the two-way player. I think he's kind of the face of the franchise for Coach Prime, not his son. So I'm excited about playing with Colorado too. Seeing I would have utilized Dylan Edwards in a crazy amount of formations, and now he's off to the races at Kansas State. So I'm sort of looking forward to seeing where Colorado is even ranked in that game. They're going to be high 80s. Are they going to put Dion 92 or something? So I'm looking forward to it.
I don't know how many guys are going to be able to block on that offensive line in the game.
Just Jordan Seaton, probably.
That's not great. Not ideal, man. Brad, this has been great. You've got like a million things coming out on 24/7 Sports. What's the next content piece? What are you working on as we speak?
Yeah, I'm working on national position group rankings across college football in the power conferences. That'll be coming in June, and I'll be seeing you in a few weeks, man, at SEC Media Days in Texas for the first time. That'll be very interesting.
Gotta have some barbecue. I've actually never been in Texas for like longer than an airport stay, which is crazy. I don't know why. It's just one of those places that I haven't had any dealings with. So
let's do barbecue and then pickleball, indoor pickleball one night. That'd be fun.
Brad, you're all about the pickleball, man. I'm gonna get into it. I love table tennis. I'm a big ping pong guy.
You'll be a natural then, yeah.
I hope so, man. Yeah, we'll get it set up, man. Looking forward to it. We'll do this again real soon, man. Appreciate it.
Good to see you, man.
We're taking a week off from Pitch Me because I wanted to be able to discuss some SEC scheduling things that have trickled out here. We're getting SEC schedule times from ESPN in the middle of May, which is beautiful. I love it. It gets me so fired up. It is a bit strange how early we're going to get a lot of these because when you don't have SEC on CBS, that's just different. The way that this all kind of trickles down, and ESPN not having to wait on CBS means that we're going to get a lot more of these kickoff times that are going to come out. And the good news is that you can just try and set up the best full day of games. And it looks like they've kind of already done that with week 1, even though I am going to miss 3:30 on CBS so much. I cannot emphasize that enough. The drums dropping, man.
The eagle flying, man. Anyway,
I don't want to get emotional. I don't want to get emotional, but we are going to get the benefit of having a full day of games where it feels like, all right, ESPN is wanting to make sure that you're not leaving the network at any point in the day because, you kind of look at it with week 1, Georgia Clemson at noon for that game.
That's a war crime. I mean, I want to hear all the bot accounts that are like, oh, the SEC is in ESPN's pocket or vice versa. It's like, what about that one then? I mean, if you think of these SEC homers.
Well, I mean, from ESPN's standpoint, they're like, well, okay, what are our 3 best games? Let's have those 3 games in a time slot. And that's kind of how this is going to work more so now. And, the Big Ten's been doing, obviously, the noon thing for a long time with Big Noon. But, I thought it was a little bit surprising. Just a reminder that this is a new era, a very new era. And, for those that were surprised by the College Game Day decision to go to A&M, I think, obviously, this new SEC ESPN package, they want to get to an SEC campus for that game. And A&M gets to host Notre Dame College Game Day. Nice little win for Mike Elko, I thought. Ironic that Game Day's last trip to A&M was 2018 for that Clemson game, which you kind of remember that was sort of Jimbo's coming out party. That game went down to the wire. It was kind of like, whoa, A&M is hanging with Clemson. This Clemson team that ended up being really good, went on to obviously win a national championship in pretty dominant fashion, if you recall. But yeah, they were a 2-point conversion away from forcing overtime in that one. People forget that. But yeah, they are going to be able to host College Game Day and have people move on from the Jimbo Fisher era, which is a big, big win. Pretty telling that Game Day is not going to Miami, Florida. I mean, first time those teams are playing in the swamp since the Tebow era. And they're not, for a pretty thin week 1 slate, it's got options. And I'm going to get to the, kind of the breakdown of the day. But for a pretty thin week 1 slate, I was kind of like, man, that's tough not to be able to get that one with in-state, out-of-conference rivals that do not play on an annual basis. But I get it. 3 consecutive losing seasons. Coach on the hot seat. Tough to sell that one for week 1. Not the best vibes overall, maybe. And emphasis on hot. Over under 91 degrees for that 3:30 kick in Gainesville. Oh, that's going to be toasty.
I mean, look, I just got my tickets officially delivered for the real Inter-Florida Battle, Florida UCF in the Swamp. That's going to be really fun. Excited on that. That's October 5th. And then, I just want to say on the opening schedule, man, I don't know why y'all keep putting Brian Kelly on Sundays and just giving him his own little day to melt down and blow up so we can all make fun of him. I think it's targeted. We've done 3 of them in a row. He's 0-2. He does the stupidest thing you've ever seen in all of them. Y'all are doing this on purpose now, and I don't appreciate it.
He's got the 4th one because it was Florida State, Notre Dame. Remember?
Oh, gosh. Oh, that one was horrible, too. That was when he told the players that he was, he had the messed up joke. I'm not going to repeat it the way he did, but yeah.
Shout out Katie George. That was a great moment in college football history. He loves Sundays. He loves playing on Sunday night. I do think he's got some back end stuff where he wants to play on that day. I do. That's the only way it makes. And we've known this for a while that it was going to be a Sunday night game. That wasn't necessarily new, but
because the Notre Dame fans were in church all day, they were nicer to him when he did what he did against FSU and almost lost to McKenzie Milton. That's why.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, let's go through the opening weekend of what it's going to look like for my couch, shall we? Is that a fun exercise to do?
Sure, yeah.
I think it is. That Thursday, we have 19 games, Will. We have 19 Thursday games, FBS games on Thursday. That's crazy. Arkansas, Mizzou against FCS foes. That's what I'll be watching. That'll be on, and then you get to watch Colorado against FCS juggernaut North Dakota State. That's going to be fun. If Deion loses to North Dakota State at 8 p.m. on a Thursday night, those Friday shows are going to be bananas.
Cowboy hat Stephen A. Smith is going to be here.
Oh, golly. Oh, the takes will be flying. Colorado's only an 8-point favorite for that one.
I bet.
I'm just saying. And then Friday night, I'm definitely going to be locking into Oklahoma, starting off against Temple. Excited to see Jackson Arnold, as I know many Oklahoma fans are. And then Saturday, main viewing screen in my household. I mean, Georgia, Clemson at noon, Miami, Florida, 3:30, Notre Dame, A&M that night. Sprinkle in a little Western Kentucky, Bama, kind of the early evening game on ESPN. We'll have that working as well. Those 3 games are all ABC. And also on ABC is obviously LSU, USC. Of course, that's going to be so much fun on Sunday night in Vegas. For those of us who like points, it's going to be fun. Well, I don't know how much fun that's going to be for you. Maybe
I'm prepared. At least we'll be in Vegas this time.
Are you surprised LSU's a 6.5-point dog?
No, I keep trying to tell everyone we're going to lose this game, but no one's going to listen to me.
All right.
I'm done. Brian Kelly, thank you for bringing up the FSU game because he should have lost that game too. All right, he should be 0-3 in these games.
That's true. That's probably true. Yeah. LSU getting its first season opening win of the 2020s. Maybe not great.
But at least, like I said, at least I'll be in Vegas, not Orange Blossom Trail in Orlando this time. All right, at least I'll be able to flush the memory out and just have a nice time.
How
Orange Blossom Trail is not where you want to be, brother.
No, that's true. That is true. But it was just the Orlando dateline of a dig. I just didn't really support that. Man. But yeah, we've even got Monday night. We got Boston College, Florida State. Maybe that's even going to be good. Mm-hmm. Who knows? 5 nights, college football, opening weekend. If the scheduling decisions moving forward are all about just trying to maximize the windows, which that's what the week 1 approach certainly is, I'm here for it. We don't have to like the Big Ten on CBS. I am a Big Ten grad telling you that I don't like the Big Ten on CBS. Okay, so if I feel this way, all of you are more than right to feel that exact way. But man, it was good to get some kickoff times. I just got the juices flowing. I was ready to go. I mean, what's too early to set the DVR? It's not. That's my favorite. I absolutely love it. We're gonna get more times too that are just gonna trickle out at random moments in like June and July. That's the beauty of the way that this is setting up.
I get it. Like, I work in TV. I get it. But the thought of like, we're gonna take Alabama versus Western Kentucky at that 7:00 slot over Clemson, Georgia, I think is a little bit of a miss. But see, I get it from a TV standpoint.
But it's ABC. It's ABC versus ESPN, so it's a little bit different.
Right. That's what I was saying is like those fans will travel like in terms of like they will show up at noon, Clemson and Georgia fans, where you might not get as many of just Bama fans because they're playing Western Kentucky. So you know what I'm saying? Like Western Kentucky fans are not going to be watching that by the millions, whereas like Clemson and Georgia will. So you can kind of put that anywhere. It's kind of like LSU Tennessee that way. But it's like, hey, you're using my positive fan base against me here. I'm not crazy about it. So I just want to speak on behalf. And of course, what a great kickoff to college football season to just Georgia fans immediately being mad. Great. The firing gun has gone off. We're ready to go.
Georgia fans are usually fired up about the home slate, the lack of headliner games. They're fired up about the noon slate. They're like, what do you mean I can't just be able to tailgate for 7 hours before this one? Look.
Our guy Perry is going to be up at like 4 a.m., man. He's going to be ready to go. Locked in.
I got plenty of Iowa buddies that have no shortage of experience tailgating for a noon kick. It can be, and for an 11 a.m. kick because it's Central Time, it can be done. It takes dedication to the game. I know you might not be in midseason form yet. Georgia fans, I am confident that you can get ready to go for a noon game. Plenty of time, all morning. Start Friday night. Go through. Drink responsibly. But you get what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, that's a show. Leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Saturday Down South on YouTube. You can watch every single episode of the Saturday Down South podcast. Follow us on Twitter at the SDS Pod, at Sat Down South, at CJ O'Gara, at Go So Hard. Thanks, guys. Talk soon.